So I just read the book of Goose by Yiyun. This was a very cozy sort of book. Probably one of my favorite books that I've read the past few months. Very well written. It had a sort of cozy melancholy to it that I really, really enjoyed. This is probably one of the best books I've read in a few months. That sort of, I don't know how to describe that cozy melancholy. It reminded me of Murakami novels where, I mean, it's nothing like a Murakami novel other than I just really enjoy reading it. And it just feels good to sit down and read it, and I look forward to reading it. And just that sort of cozy, I don't know, that's a longing, almost a nostalgia, but not obviously a nostalgia. I don't know how to describe it, but I really enjoyed it, and I immediately went and bought or ordered a couple other books by this author. So the author herself has gone through a lot. When she had written this book, she had just lost her son to suicide, her teenage son, and had dedicated the book to him. She had also dealt with suicide herself in the past, and I mention those things because suicide and the death of children, they don't play a role in this novel, but they're mentioned throughout, and they exist in this world. So just really makes you think of sort of what sort of person she is, and how she sort of either had the strength or sort of dealt with those things through her writing. Just sort of interesting stuff. Later, her second child also committed suicide, again as a teenager, but this is before that happened. But just incredible stuff that she had gone through. So she's an American author, originally born in China, I believe, but immigrated to the U.S. as a young adult and has been living there ever since. And I think that's also important because that also plays into the stuff that I'm reading into the book, at least. So this book has sort of many layers to it, or there's sort of different levels, different strata, different interpretations of what the book could mean or be about, or what you could take from it, in my opinion. Like, for example, on the very first page of the book, she writes that you can slash a book. There are different ways to measure depth, but not many readers measure a book's depth with a knife, making a cut from the first page all the way down to the last. Why not, I wonder? So depending on how deeply you cut into this book, metaphorically, there are different things you can get from it. So first of all, I just want to go through it literally, and then we'll go from there. So it's the story set from the perspective of this young woman living in the US with her husband, and she gets a net letter from her mother, who lives in France, where she is from, revealing that her childhood friend Fabienne has died in childbirth, by the way. That's kind of a reoccurring theme, that there's constantly people dying of childbirth, which is a normal human thing to do. So she's writing this book in the 1960s, like 1966, I think. And with the death of this Fabienne, she then picks up her pen and starts writing this account, this novel, which is a reflection back on her life, and specifically her childhood and the events of these couple years when she was a teenager with this Fabienne. So her name's Agnès. She was a peasant girl living in rural France right after the Second World War. She had been born beginning of the war, grew up throughout the privations of the war and the post-war period, and the majority of our story takes place in, I think, 1955. So the summer of 1955 she describes as the happiest moment of her life. Just on the topic of happiness, I love how the author describes happiness. She said that happiness, I would tell her, is to spend every day without craning one's neck to look forward to tomorrow, next month, next year, and without holding out one's hand to stop every day from becoming yesterday. I love that happiness is not always looking forward to the next thing, always focusing on the future, but it's also not trying to prevent the past from encroaching upon us and trying to stop time. It's sort of a living in the moment and recognizing that things will pass, but not being too concerned about the future. I think it was beautifully put. The whole book is beautifully written. And so these two girls, Agnès and Fabienne, they decide to play a game together. So they're constantly playing games. I don't know how much I can explain the relationship between these two girls. I mean, it is very important to the book, but they're almost twin souls. You could almost say they're soulmates. They are in love, certainly, in a way or another. Agnès is sort of the very passive partner, while Fabienne is the much more active partner and sort of the controlling partner. And though we get the book from Agnès's point of view, and she, of course, loves Fabienne, it seems to the reader, to me, that Fabienne is kind of, she's really mean to Agnès in ways, and sort of bullies her and belittles her and controls her. And so I could see someone taking the approach that this is sort of a very toxic relationship, a very one-sided relationship where Agnès is being used by Fabienne. But because we get it from Agnès's point of view, we see these things, but it doesn't really bother Agnès. She sort of lives for Fabienne, and she's sort of she's okay with it, to the point where I don't see a problem with their relationship. The way the author describes it is that they're so compatible and they're so sort of in love, and I mean, love's such a loaded word, but they're so intertwined and interconnected that, yes, of course, they're different, and maybe she treats her differently. But anyways, Fabienne's a very interesting character. But they decide to play this game. They are constantly making up games, sort of playing tricks on people. Fabienne almost lives in sort of a make-believe world where reality, and that's a big sort of part of this book, is what is reality. To Fabienne, reality is sort of whatever they make it. So she sort of lies and deceives, but does so in a way that the truth is malleable to her, and she sort of makes whatever she wants to be true. Anyway, so their new game is they're going to write a book, and they ask this man, Monsieur Deveau, who's the postmaster, he's an older man, he's really ugly. They constantly describe how ugly he is, but his wife died, and Fabienne decides that, I don't know, in order to cheer him up or distract him, they're going to go and ask him to help them write a book. And so that's what they do. Now, Fabienne, unfortunately, does not get to go to school. Her mother has died. Her older sister has died in childbirth. So she's constantly working on the farm, doesn't get to go to school. Agnes, she's continuing to go to school. She has better penmanship. And so they agree to write this book together, by which I mean that Fabienne is the one going to be dictating and actually creating the story, whereas Agnes is going to be the one writing it down, but also taking the credit for it. So Monsieur Deveau agrees to send the book off to Paris to a publisher after he's edited it, but they decide to stick Agnes's name on it, even though really it's not her book. She hasn't written it. She's just sort of recorded it. But she goes along with this game, and things don't really get out of hand, but they do escalate. So the book called Les Enfants Heureux, it's the happy children. It's all about children who have died in sort of tragic circumstances at very young ages, and it's very horrific and morbid and grotesque. But because it's from sort of a peasant girl, the people in Paris are loving it. They're like, wow, look at this perspective, this 13-year-old girl, what is she writing? This is so cool. So she gets sort of 5 minutes of fame. And so Agnes goes to Paris. She experiences things she's never experienced before, like wealth and the world and whatnot. And Fabienne's like, cool, good, keep telling me about this stuff and we can write another book. Now, there is a scene where Fabienne, she is trouble. She is worried that Monsieur Deveau is sort of going to get involved in the book, or he's going to reveal the secrets that Fabienne's actually the one writing it. And so they plan to shut him up and get rid of him by faking a sexual assault. And so Fabienne confesses to Agnes that Monsieur Deveau has proposed to be the lover of Fabienne. Fabienne's like thinking, maybe I should go for it, like, why not? But then she decides, no, look, we'll pretend that he's assaulting me, and we'll get him sort of kicked out of the village, which is horrible thing to do to someone. But again, that's sort of what is reality. And do we trust Fabienne? So I wonder if he had asked this 13-year-old girl to be his lover, or if she made that part up. Agnes seems to believe her, but do we believe her? Who knows? And so they do sort of fake this encounter, and Monsieur Deveau has to sort of leave. He moves away. But it is sort of a weird thing where, did anything bad actually happen? Did it not? Was it all made up? Was it not? Who knows? The nature of reality in a fictional world doesn't matter. Next, we have Agnes getting some interest in England. So her book's going to be translated into English. And so this Mrs. Townsend, this woman who runs a finishing school for young women or young girls, comes to France and agrees to take her on for a year. And so she travels to England and stays at this school where she's ostensibly supposed to be writing a book describing her life at this school. And of course, the whole reason this woman, Mrs. Townsend, is taking her in is because she's sort of the hot new celebrity of the moment, and that she wants to use this girl to have a book written about her school as advertising. But Agnes is not happy there. She's writing to Fabienne, and Fabienne writes back to her, and they really start to miss each other, both of them. But of course, Fabienne writes it in her sort of own, not mean, well, it is mean, but her own way. I think it's just her personality. I think she does love Agnes. It is interesting, though, that when they separate, Fabienne decides to create this new persona, this fake brother of hers called Jacques, and she's saying that Jacques and Agnes are in love and sort of boyfriend-girlfriend. And so she's writing letters from herself, Fabienne, but she's also writing letters from her brother, Jacques, which are like sort of love letters to Agnes, and sort of this sort of weird fictional romance blossoms between these two characters. But it could just be another game that Fabienne's playing, but the way that Agnes is taking it, and also the way that Fabienne's writing it, it doesn't really feel like Fabienne. So is she using this medium of this fake brother who's in love with Agnes as a way to sort of share her true feelings for Agnes, and using this guise of a boy, of a man, to share thoughts and feelings that she's either too embarrassed to share without that guise, or that society would not appreciate, which I like to read into it that way, that, you know, this is 1950s, same-sex relationships are not really okay. And even after this, near the end of the book, Agnes says to Fabienne, like, we don't need to get married, we can just live together forever, like, we don't need to grow up and have children or whatever, we can just stick together. And so just before we get to that, she really detests her life in England at this school, and so she ends up leaving and coming back to Paris and then to Saint-Remy, the village that she's from, and reunites with Fabienne. But it's pretty tragic that even though this game that they started is now over, Fabienne and her their paths have already diverged. Something has happened that they cannot go back to that sort of childhood of being so interlocked and so connected. They recognize that, well, Fabienne sort of forces it on her that, hey, our paths are forking now, we have to go our separate ways. And that's when she says, like, well, why don't we just stay together and live together forever? And then the book sort of has some time skips about how they do drift apart slowly over time, and how Agnes moves to Paris, gets jobs, meets this American, and moves to America, and Fabienne ends up joining the circus, and eventually dies in childbirth at the age of 27 in 1966. And it's sort of that the death of Fabienne. And it's a very circular novel because it's telling a story and then ending at the point at which the story starts again, with the character in 1966 getting the news that Fabienne has died. So I went and read the first few chapters again to sort of get that loop. But the character says that when Fabienne dies, she sort of feels free enough to write again, which gets me into the deeper layers of the novel. So what did the author mean by all this? Is it just the story as presented literally, or is there more to it? Now, the author herself immigrated to America and must have experienced this sort of different culture, different language, although she probably spoke English. But is that experience what we see in Agnes moving from France to England and experiencing that? Potentially. But the thing that really got me is this whole sort of questioning reality and what is fiction and what is not, and what sort of stories can you make up and believe that these stories are real, and even if they're not real, does your believing in them make them real for you? And I sort of have this weird sort of theory, or I like to imagine that perhaps the character Fabienne is a total creation of Agnes. Maybe she does not really exist. Maybe she is just a part of Agnes, sort of two sides of this one person, these two sorts of personalities. And when the sort of more rebellious or more creative side that spurs her to write these novels, when she goes to England, she sort of loses contact with that younger version of herself, that different side of herself. And when she tries to move back to Saint-Remy to reconnect with her past, she finds that Fabienne side of her is drifting away and is gone, and she can't really bring that back into her. And so she sort of loses that creativity and that sort of differentness or rebelliousness, and becomes a quote-unquote normal person. And then only at the sort of end/start of this book in 1966, when the Fabienne dies, does she sort of get revitalized and sort of incorporate that side of her back into herself, and thus start writing again. Now, why do I come up with this crazy theory out of nowhere? Well, part of it is at the very end, when Agnes and Fabienne meet back up again, there's this scene where Fabienne puts her hands around Agnes's neck, like she's going to throttle her or choke her, but she's not. She's just holding her hands there, and Agnes is totally okay with that, because they're so close that, yeah, you can touch me there, that's fine. And is almost okay with, like, you can choke and kill me, like, and that would be okay. And there's different parts of this book where different characters like Monsieur Deveau and other characters, Agnes imagines, well, Fabienne could kill that person, or maybe I could kill that person. There's sort of these weird thoughts of murder to deal with problems. And so having the Fabienne potentially murder or kill Agnes. To me, that's sort of a type of suicide, is that side of Agnes sort of killing her, or maybe it's just killing the part of her. So the Fabienne part will remain the sort of the prime of this being, and the Agnes part will pass away. Or just suicide as in the author herself, maybe reading into the author's life too much, as she sort of dealt with suicidal thoughts. And so maybe this is sort of a moment when the character Agnes could have died and would have been totally okay with that. There is a lot of talk of death, and because it's written in or set in 1955, set in the 1950s in France, like death is sort of a common occurrence. Like one of the brothers, Jean, dies from a German labor camp in the war. There's multiple deaths in childbirth. There's children who die of just random diseases and illnesses. And the characters themselves lie on gravestones and in graveyards from time to time. Death is ever present in this book. It is never something that, like nowadays, where death is we're very cut off from death. We separate ourselves from death. We have celebrations of life now. We don't have funerals. As soon as someone does die, the body gets taken away to a hospital or a morgue and hidden away from sight. Our culture doesn't really experience death like it did 100 years ago, where people were inundated and surrounded by it and reminded of it all the time. And obviously the author had to have been thinking about death when she lost her son and dedicated this book to her son. So yeah, what is the real meaning of this book? Is it really just about these two girls and their kind of wacky game of creating these books together as like an adventure? Or is it more than that? Is it about this one person having a sort of an identity crisis, or having an imaginary friend as a child and then sort of growing out of that phase? Is it someone using that sort of a projection of themselves to deal with trauma? Or is it just a metaphor for an individual that has two sides to them, and one side ends up being dominant, and that's where that sort of leads their life in that sort of path? I don't know. I'm not really that smart, nor am I that educated in terms of literature, but I do really, really like this book. Like I said, it has that sort of that cozy prose that as you're reading, you're just like, wow, this is a really good book. The title I think is a bit weird, Book of Goose, because in the sort of prologue / end of the book, the character in 1966, she's living on the east coast of the US, and she's raising geese. She raises chickens and different animals, but the geese are special to her because they are, I want to say passive, but she has a whole thing about how people see them as passive versus chickens that are very active. And in America, being active is a virtue, where being passive is something seen as being very bad. But how the geese, though they seem passive, are actually much sort of wiser, and there's much more to them. But I don't know, the geese metaphor was kind of lost on me. Like you saw, I took this book in a really different direction. But yeah, even if you just take it literally, I think it's just a beautiful sort of love story between these two sort of best friends, potential roommates, or lovers, soulmates. Could be anything. It doesn't matter. You don't need to stick labels on it. They're very different people, but of course I'm slightly envious of the relationship of having someone like that. But anyways, that is The Book of Goose by Yiyun Li. Highly, highly recommend this one. Great book.